It's time for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. I'm your host, Tony Graham. Good day, Matthew.
Yeah, good morning, Tony. Great to be chatting again.
Certainly is. Now, a question for you. Have you ever heard of Toshiba notebooks?
I'm actually a big fan of Toshiba notebooks. In fact, for many years, I reckon probably at least 10, maybe 15 years, the only notebook I would have, Tony, was a Toshiba notebook. But the last
Same
notebook,
with me.
well, I love them, but the last notebook
Yeah.
that I bought, I didn't buy a Toshiba notebook, and it wasn't for lack of trying, but unfortunately, Toshiba now, as of this week, is officially completely out of the laptop business. They had sold about 80% of their business off a few years ago to Sharp, and what seems really incredible to me, Tony, is when we see a little startup business get going and it's just got an internet presence out there or it's got an app, and someone comes along and snaps it up for billions of dollars. It seems like that's the minimum price for any app these days. 80% of Toshiba's notebook or laptop business was sold for only 36 million. Now, I know 36 million is still a couple of dollars, but it just seems like they had a real product, they had this manufacturing process, and that was all sold off for only $36 million compared to the billions that some apps are sold for. So that was a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, that was sold off, and now the rest of that's been sold to Sharp. So as of this week, Toshiba notebooks officially no longer exist. And I can remember they were really great at the beginning of notebook days. I remember selling Toshiba notebooks in the very early days, and I was fascinated by them. They were big clunky machines. They had a 3.5-inch floppy in the side. They had about 256K of memory. I think the TL1100 was one of the first ones that I sold. And I remember selling them, and I couldn't afford one, but I thought, wow, I hope one day I'll be able to actually sell enough of these that I'll be able to make enough money to be able to afford one of these notebooks, these laptops. And they were huge devices. They used to get hot if you sat them on your lap. They had a mono screen. The initial ones that I sold had a mono screen. But again, it seems like a sad revelation of the times, but we're now at the point that no longer can you buy a Toshiba notebook.
Well, it seems to me there's a loss of the brand name associated with it. That in itself would be a big loss in value in that process of selling it. But anyway.
Yeah, well, you're right, but again, maybe that brand name doesn't have the same prestige that it used to have for people that used to buy the original ones and recognise Toshiba as a quality brand. In fact, it was a few years ago when I bought another Toshiba notebook when they still existed, and my son was trying to convince me to buy another brand, and I just went, no, Toshiba makes the best notebooks. And he'd grown up where the world had changed, and he said, no, and he rattled off 10 brands that he thought were better brands than Toshiba at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Anyway, now Hyundai have just announced a new car brand, so that's interesting.
It's a little bit confusing actually from Hyundai, Tony. They've announced a new car brand, and it's a little bit like, say, Toyota has the Lexus brand or Honda has the Acura brand. They've basically created an offshoot to create a different identity, and the brand is Ioniq, spelled IONIQ. And the idea is that it's an electric brand only, so an electric vehicle brand only. But what's really confusing is Hyundai's been going quite well with electric vehicles. They've got their Kona. I've actually sat inside a Kona, driven a Kona. I was quite impressed with it. And they've also got an Ioniq. So it's a Hyundai Ioniq, and they've got 3 models in the Ioniq, and one of those is a hybrid and one of those is purely electric. But they've created the Ioniq brand now, and the Hyundai Ioniq is not part of the Ioniq range, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know why they would call it the same name but then not have that across there. So in the future, as early as next year, you'll have the Hyundai Ioniq as the hybrid or the purely electric vehicle, and then you'll have the Ioniq brand, which is purely electric. The first one that'll be out next year will be an SUV, a small SUV, and that'll be the Ioniq 5. And then by the year 2025, they say they'll have 3 specific models. And I think it's interesting what Tesla has done is made it acceptable to reduce the number of models that a car brand has. So Hyundai is going down that same track. So Ioniq will have, by the year 2025, 3 distinctive separate models, and they're hoping to get about 10% of the worldwide market share. So fairly ambitious, but obviously that market share of EVs at the moment is smaller. But the idea is that they believe the future of cars around the world, and definitely the future for Hyundai in terms of their overall profitability long term, is to go down this EV range. And I think what we'll eventually see is that maybe Ioniq will take over completely from the Hyundai brand with the EV range.
Yes. Well, now, Matthew, telehealth, that's becoming something that's spoken about a lot these days. And I can tell you from my own daughter's experience as a registered nurse that in some of these hospitals now outside of major towns, that they don't even have doctors there anymore. So they're using telehealth. So tell us about telehealth.
Well, it is one of those things that's been talked about a lot, Tony. You're spot on. There's been lots of discussion around telehealth. There have been little trials that have been running. In fact, there was a particular person that has started up a new telehealth operation now, and this particular person had been hired by the CSIRO way back in 2012 as part of a federal government strategy to get going with some of the telehealth and start working on it. And that was all going along at a normal sort of sensible pace. There was nothing dramatic happening. And then, of course, COVID-19 came along. So Dr. Pfeiffer, in this particular example, went out and started up CoVIU, which is a healthcare video conferencing platform dedicated specifically to that. And basically, once the Minister, Greg Hunt, announced that telehealth was now a Medicare item, suddenly companies like CoVIU suddenly took off. And this is the thing that they'd been running some trials, they'd been working on a few things, and they were doing a few hundred consultations a day. And again, once it became a Medicare health item, then that few hundred a day went to around 25,000 consultations a day. So it was probably 3 or 4 years growth crammed into maybe a month to try and get things operating. But now you've got this whole program, and this is just one of them, that's working every day to try and get things happening for people in various locations, and not just remote locations. It might be in a major city, but you don't have access to the particular medical specialist, or you don't want to leave your house for a whole range of reasons. So the big thing with some of these telehealth programs, though, is not like Zoom, not like Skype, not like Microsoft Teams. You don't have to actually install any software. The whole idea is to make it as easy as possible and secure. So they're the two big things with specific telehealth apps. You don't really want someone joining in like a Zoom meeting where we see people Zoom bombing. You don't really want to be discussing your private medical issues, and suddenly, I'm there talking to my doctor, and Tony Graham joins in. Hi, Matthew, what are we talking about today? I didn't know you had that problem. So it's obviously something that's really important to have security at the core of it, but also ease of use, because you can imagine some of the people using this are people that might be aged, or there might be people that don't have great technology in their home. So making it easy to use and secure are the two big things. So sure, one company is really seeing a huge increase in the amount of use of telehealth, but there are lots of companies seeing this. And again, I think the federal government's made the right move by putting it on Medicare, and that means that there is this explosion in telehealth. So I think what's been talked about for a long time, Tony, now we're finally seeing.
And that could be really good for people in the bush, improving the availability of specialised medical people.
Yeah,
so,
that's right. And far be it for me to quote the Health Minister, but he did say that he intends for telehealth to be a positive legacy of this crisis. And again, it is terrible what we've got with COVID-19. It's affecting people. I mean, people are dying, so you can't get any worse than that. People are having their businesses impacted, people's health being impacted. But again, you're always trying to look for what positives we can see out of this. And I think this will be one of those positives. And again, when we live out here in the bush, we will, I think, get some benefits out of this long term, because we'll have better access to medical professionals.
Yeah. And you'll be listening to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickinson on Binjang 91.5. I'm your host, Tony Graham. Stay tuned this afternoon at 3:40 p.m. for the next edition. And it's back to the great music and community information on Binjang.
Great. Look forward to chatting this afternoon, Tony.
Thanks, Matthew.